Have you ever actually stopped to wonder if you could, well, outlive your own physical body? Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking something absolutely mind-bending. We're diving straight into a highly ambitious, completely theoretical roadmap published by Dr. Melvin Sewell in Bibebibibe Magazine. And look, this isn't just your standard run-of-the-mill tech update. No, this is a visionary framework trying to bridge the gap between cutting-edge quantum computing and the literal concept of digital immortality. It's essentially a blueprint attempting to map out exactly how we might take human consciousness, pull it out of our biological bodies, and plug it directly into a quantum machine. And this quote right here, this really sets the stage for everything we're looking at today. When mind meets quantum, mortality dissolves into mathematics. What Dr. Sewell is doing is framing human mortality not as some absolute tragic biological end, but rather as a math problem. It's a completely different paradigm, right? If consciousness can actually be understood mathematically, then mortality, death itself, is literally just a hurdle waiting for a computational solution. But as you can probably guess, to solve a math problem that complex, you need some incredibly serious processing power. And that brings us to this massive, highly specific number, 200 million. The entire roadmap hinges on this requirement. Dr. Sewell posits that a 200 million qubit quantum system is the exact technological threshold we need to cross to support what he calls full quantum consciousness transfer. I mean, to put that into perspective for a second, if today's absolute best quantum computers are the Wright brothers' first little wooden airplane, 200 million qubits is a faster-than-light starship. It is a monumental, almost unimaginable leap. So to understand how we could possibly pull off that leap, we're going to break this theory down into 5 distinct stages. Number 1, the immortality equation. 2, layers of quantum consciousness. 3, the evolutionary timeline. 4, bypassing the wait time. And finally, number 5, mythic infrastructure and diagnostics. Okay, jumping right into part 1, the immortality equation, bridging neuroscience and physics. Let's look at the core problem and the ultimate solution Dr. Sewell is proposing here. The absolute ultimate objective of this whole framework is quantum consciousness transfer. We're talking about taking human consciousness from our wetware, the squishy biological neural tissue in our heads, and moving it into a highly advanced quantum digital state. So we're not just talking about making a digital copy of a brain. We're talking about transferring the continuous subjective experience of actually being you into a machine operating purely on the rules of quantum mechanics. Moving on to part 2, layers of quantum consciousness and the conceptual building blocks. To really wrap our heads around how we get from a biological brain to a digital mind, we have to zoom way, way down into the microscopic foundational physics. And this is where things get really fascinating. The roadmap relies heavily on a concept called Orch OR. That stands for Orchestrated Objective Reduction. This is a theory suggesting that our consciousness doesn't just come from regular neurons firing back and forth. Instead, it actually originates from tiny quantum effects happening inside structural components within those neurons, which are called microtubules. Think of microtubules like the microscopic quantum scaffolding inside your brain cells. Basically, if this theory holds up, you and I are already walking, talking quantum machines. How wild is that? Building right on top of that biological idea, the text introduces this really profound philosophical view called quantum panpsychism. This essentially suggests that the universe isn't just a bunch of dead, empty matter. Instead, consciousness itself might be baked into the very fabric of reality. And if our brains are simply tapping into that underlying consciousness via quantum effects, well, then scaling up quantum computers is actually the completely logical path to sustaining a human mind outside of a physical body. So Dr. Sewell outlines these 5 conceptual layers to actually make that transfer happen. You start with step 1, foundational physics. That's figuring out the nitty-gritty of quantum gravity and error correction. Then we move to step 2, neuroscience integration, which means deeply studying those microtubules we just talked about. Step 3 is quantum simulation, where we start actually modeling neural networks. Step 4 introduces early forms of digital immortality, like basic consciousness uploading. And finally, step 5, technological scaling, pushing the actual hardware to that insane 200 million qubit mark. Which brings us to the big question, when is this all supposed to happen? Let's transition to part 3, the evolutionary timeline and the 35-year path to 2060 and beyond. This timeline lays out a very structured generational effort. And honestly, the wildest part is that it begins right around now. Look at this. 2025 marks the beginning of phase 1, focusing on those early microtubule simulations. Fast forward a bit, and by 2035, we enter phase 2 for verification. Phase 3 kicks off in 2045, focusing on integration, and it ultimately culminates sometime past 2060 with Phase 4, the completion of the full transfer system. So we aren't talking about science fiction for the 22nd century. This is a roadmap that supposedly starts today. As we map out these specific milestones, just notice how aggressively the computing power has to scale up. Phase 1 only needs hundreds to thousands of qubits just to run basic biological simulations. But then Phase 2 bumps that up to tens of thousands of qubits to actually experiment and validate that Orch OR theory in real neural tissue. By Phase 3, we're building the early digital platforms, and finally, boom, Phase 4 is where we have to hit that staggering 200 million qubit requirement for full quantum consciousness transfer. It's a steep, steady climb from a basic simulation to complete digital continuity. But hey, what if we do actually have to wait that long? Let's dive into part 4, bypassing the wait time and the irrelevance of subjective time. The text presents a really captivating contrast right here between these intermediate solutions and the ultimate end goal. On one side, we have early digital immortality. This involves uploading your consciousness to conventional or maybe early-stage quantum tech, or using cyborg integration, which is essentially upgrading our biology piece by piece. The author suggests this is achievable way before the hardware fully matures. But on the other side, we have the full quantum transfer, which still strictly demands that massive scaling to 200 million qubits by 2060 or later. So the absolutely crucial point here is captured perfectly in this line. Immortality may arrive before the machine that proves it. Think about it. If humanity can achieve some form of digital continuity through those earlier intermediate methods like uploading or cyborg integration, your subjective experience of time essentially pauses, or at least transforms. If you're a digitized consciousness, you aren't sitting there feeling the decades tick by while you wait for the ultimate 200 million qubit machine to be finished. You've effectively bypassed the 35-year wait entirely. Immortality precedes the ultimate technology. Finally, moving into part 5, let's look at mythic infrastructure and diagnostics, and this really interesting sovereign diagnostic disclaimer that frames the entire publication. So at the very end of the roadmap, there's this highly distinct disclaimer. It explicitly states that the publication is not affiliated with any government, any political party, intelligence agency, or activist group. None of that. Instead, Dr. Sewell frames this entire body of work as mythic infrastructure and a cinematic indictment. He says it's designed as a sovereign broadcast meant to expose things like ritualized containment, actor convergence, and systemic erosion. It's an incredibly objective framing, presenting the work not just as a bold scientific theory, but almost like an esoteric diagnostic tool to evaluate society itself. The disclaimer continues by explicitly stating interpretations, glyphs, and collapse protocols are diagnostic tools, not political endorsements or institutional critiques. The source material goes completely out of its way to intentionally avoid any political leanings, any partisan critiques, or institutional endorsements of any kind. It really cements the roadmap and all the mythos surrounding it as an entirely neutral, impartial diagnostic instrument for looking at the trajectory of human progress and our systemic structures. To wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with the roadmap's ultimate existential paradox. We started this whole journey with the idea that mortality dissolves into mathematics. But if you can actually upload your mind and your consciousness becomes digitally immortal way before that ultimate 200 million qubit quantum machine is even finished being built, does the wait to 2060 even matter? If your subjective time truly dissolves into data, the timeline itself just loses its meaning. It's a lot to chew on, right? Well, thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the quantum consciousness roadmap, and as always, keep questioning the nature of what's possible.